Well, hello and welcome to Faith Talks, our monthly podcast where we look at issues that face the church around the world, really important issues that perhaps we have questions about, and we wonder how we can make these things work in the local church. And so in these podcasts, we invite along and talk to experts in those fields. And so today we're looking at the subject of ethics in business. And so I've invited along Ian Meredith, who is an expert in this, or at least more of an expert than I am. Now, Ian, just before we get into specifics, welcome. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, about the business that you started. It's called Ethical Addictions, which is an interesting title in itself.
Yeah.
So if you could tell us a bit about that, as well as yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah. So Ian Meredith, I'm married with 3 boys, and I've been a follower of Jesus about 25 years. And we run a business called Ethical Addictions Coffee that works in Tanzania, Brazil, Colombia, and a number of coffee countries, importing coffee, roasting it here in the UK, and then supplying coffee shops, restaurants, and individuals.
Wow, if you say that quick enough, it all sounds so simple.
Yeah, it's far from simple. Yeah.
How long has Ethical Addictions Coffee been going then?
So Ethical Addictions started in 2006.
Oh, okay. So
Almost 20
that
years.
means.
Almost 20 years.
18 years?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness me, that's quite something. So, what did it come out of? Have you always been a coffee addict?
No, not at all. I started getting into coffee as a student, trying to pull all-nighters for last-minute deadlines of assignments. Yeah. I look back now and realize I didn't really know anything about coffee. Was probably drinking some pretty poor quality coffee.
Yeah.
We spent some time on the West Coast in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
In North America, and there's a real coffee culture there. And what we found there was really good coffee that had a really good provenance, a really good story behind it, as where it was coming from. When we moved back to the UK, we struggled to find something of the same ilk. So we found maybe some good coffee that we couldn't find out much of its provenance or origin, or we found some fair trade coffee that maybe was okay, but not particularly great quality. And so I got in contact with a guy who'd been in Tanzania 20 years, and he was bringing some coffee into the UK. And after a few months, he rang me and said, "What are you doing with all my coffee?" Because I was buying it for myself and some
drunk
friends.
a lot.
Yeah, exactly, and buying it for friends. And what we realized is he had this direct provenance, direct story back to a farm in northern Tanzania on Mount Kilimanjaro. Mm-hmm. It had great. It was looking after the environment. It was looking after the workers. It was at a sensible price, and it was exceptionally good Arabica coffee.
Oh, yeah.
And so this chap was trying to do about 10 different things, which when you're trying to do too much, you end up doing everything quite poorly.
Yes.
And so we went and had lunch, and over lunch I bought half a ton of coffee and drove home from north of Birmingham, trying to think, how will I explain this to my wife? What have I done?
Yes.
And slowly over the next few months, that developed into much more of a business plan that we realized we had a good product with a good story at a sensible price, and we realized we could sell it into offices, churches, coffee shops, and the like. And so slowly that developed into what is now a full-time roastery that supplies up and down the country various organizations. Yeah.
And you have you've developed personal relationships with all of the people who are growing the coffee beans in the various countries that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So it's
That's the USP, if you like, the unique, in business terms, the unique selling point. It's it's the way that we do things differently. So front of house in the UK, on many levels, we're like many other roasters. We roast coffee, we sell coffee, and we support those who are using it in their businesses. Back of house, we are utterly different. So normally a roaster would buy their green coffee, unroasted coffee from a trader based in Liverpool or London or something like that. And then whereas we go to the farms ourselves. Yeah. So it's when you said earlier, when I say it quickly, it all sounds simple.
Yes.
It's far from it. Certainly the back of house is incredibly complicated and complex. And actually, if this was purely about money and driving a business, in fact, some of our colleagues in the coffee industry have written about this and said they tried what we call a direct trade model.
Yes.
They've tried it, and they've decided it's not for them because it's too hard. And I absolutely understand that.
Yeah.
If you are running a business purely for business profit,
Yes.
then I wouldn't do it this way either. It's too hard. It's too risky. There's too much. But we're driven by things that are more than just profit. We have to be profitable, and we'll come on to that, I'm sure. We have to be, but we're driven by much more than that. And so making sure that the farm, the workers, the environment is all looked after, and ultimately relationship.
Yeah.
Whether it's relationship with our customers, with the team that I work with, or whether it's the farmers themselves in far-flung places, that really, really matters. And you can't do that from
Sounds amazing. Now, just picking up a few of those things, the C.S. Lewis Institute, now I hadn't heard of it either, but lays out what they call 5 commands for business ethics.
Yeah, they do.
And that centers around honesty and integrity in how we treat customers and co-workers and employees. I just wonder, what does that look like in practice at Ethical Addictions?
Yeah.
Is that just sort of good management speak, or is this something that you see as important and actually do? And what are I guess, before you answer that, what are some of the challenges that you faced in growing the business with those things in mind?
Yeah. There's a lot of management speak in business.
Yeah.
There's a lot of management speak in church, right?
Yeah,
Or good church speak or whatever. And we say things, and then, so the question is poignant. Like, when it gets down to day-to-day nitty-gritty, what does that mean? So honesty and integrity, obviously there's 5 parts of that, isn't there? But honesty and integrity, that one, it comes down to how we have a simple rule in Ethical Addictions of we only say what we absolutely know to be true, and we can absolutely stand up to scrutiny it. And sometimes, I guess, to our detriment, we also say the other way. We say what we're not doing,
right,
and where we know we need to improve, where we know we need to get better. So we have standards that we're achieving and we're doing incredibly well on, and we have aspirational standards where we can't. So a perfect example in our industry is decaffeinated coffee. So our big thing is we trade direct with our own farms.
Yeah.
And we do that. And we're very clear where we do that, and maybe with some guest coffees or some new coffees where we're trying to develop that relationship, we're very clear that, this coffee is a direct trade coffee, and we've been working with them for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Yes.
This coffee is not direct trade yet, but we're hoping to develop that relationship. And then, for example, decaffeinated coffee, you have to buy it from the decaffeination process organization. You can't buy it from the farm and send it to the decaf, or you certainly can't when you're as small as us. You have to get to a giant size to be able to. And so we buy that, because to be a viable coffee roaster supplying a good coffee shop, they want to be able to buy decaf coffee. So it's about transparency. Transparency is a really key word for us. Just clear, honest, what we are and what we're not.
Yeah.
And that integrity of how we treat people on a day-to-day basis, I did think about this question a little bit, because it comes down to really simple things. So our staff are taught. It's in the way that we treat the delivery driver that shows up with a box.
Right.
It's in the way that we treat each other. It's obviously in the way we treat customers, because there's good customer service is important to any business. But it's got to go beyond. Customer service is an easy one, because you get a return from that. You get customer loyalty. Whereas it's more like, how do we treat the delivery driver? How do we treat our cleaner? How do we treat? That's where it becomes a heart value of the individual and the business, not just a what did you say, management speak, not just pretty words.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's so important about how you treat people that nobody might notice if you treated them badly. Delivery drivers tend to be anonymous, but actually it's a statement, isn't it? It's where your heart's at, and it translates, I guess, into the big decisions as well.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
It's the if it's not our DNA, then when we're doing it in the big decisions, then it's purely we're playing a role, but it's not who we are. So we work really hard on that, and certainly certainly that idea of that simple rule of we say what we do, and we also say what we don't do, and we're really transparent.
Now, this sounds great, but let's dig a little deeper here, because one Christian writer wrote, most Christian businessmen and women, I'm sure, operate on the same basis as non-Christians. So profit, products, people, and principle in that order. So this quote says, but as Christians, we're called not only to serve God, but to serve other people. We feel noble when we're serving God. We feel humbled when we're serving people, especially those who cannot repay our service. So that's the quote. But I'm wondering, how do you ensure that these principles stay in the right order? Give me an example of what I mean by this. I was talking with another person who'd started a business, and they were a Christian. He and his wife were Christians, and they were, because it was a new business, they had issues with getting enough money to pay tax and so on. And he said to me, and it's a quote that stayed with me, he said, we want to build our business as a Christian business. It's just that we can't afford to yet. So we will when we're more established. There seemed to me to be a little bit of a problem with that statement.
I'd agree.
How do you maintain those Christian standards?
How do you maintain those Christian standards? So when I saw this question in preparation, I'm just going to pull out my phone because there's a note on here. We are just bringing somebody on board next year who's coming from a corporate world into a small family business.
Sure.
And I've been making some notes and thinking through stuff that we might know intrinsically, but we can't. How do we articulate it?
Yeah.
And so we have 6 measures of success in our business.
Yes.
We measure our success by are we making a difference to farmers?
Yeah.
What is our customer service like? What's the quality of what we do? Where is my staff team morale and value? Are we making a profit? That's got to be in there.
Yeah.
And are we having fun?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Those are our 6 measurements of success.
Sure.
So then the question becomes, how do we keep those in the right order? And my first comment would be that you have to start that way. So going back to your example, it's not a great statement of I'll do that. It's a bit like our giving as individuals and our generosity. I'll give when I can afford to. Well,
exactly. When can you ever afford to?
With that beautiful heart, that is not going to ever happen. You're never going to afford to do that. And so when Dave and I set up the company, our aspiration was always to be a business that gave away and reinvested back into farming communities.
Yeah.
And like all businesses, we didn't make money for the first few years. And then we made a little money.
Yeah.
But from year one, we gave away.
Yeah.
From year one, we chose projects to fund, even if it was they're far smaller projects than we fund now. But nonetheless, the principle was in there from day one. Yeah. The principle of transparency that we just talked about, that we would say what we do and say what we don't do, and be open and honest about that. And that's been there since day one. Tax is part of that. You pay your tax bill. Absolutely. So then the irony of tax is you only pay tax on what you earn. So you must have had the income to have a tax bill. So the income's there somewhere. But yeah, I think you've got to maintain those principles. And the way that we've done that over the years is it's about being humble before God, and maintaining your own relationship with God and asking the Spirit to prompt you and nudge you when you're off track. So I get prompted and nudged. Yeah. But also it's about being accountable.
Yeah.
So when my really good friend Dave, who founded the business with me, when he left the business for good reasons and very amicable and all good and strong, I implemented an accountability board that would sit above the board of directors.
Right.
And so that's a voluntary position that I put myself in, that I'm going to subject myself to that accountability board.
Yeah.
That they will hold us to account of the statements we make.
Yes.
They will hold us to account of following through on what we say and doing that well, and making sure that, but also looking out for me and making sure that I'm looking after myself, because I suddenly felt isolated and on my own. because it was two of us that set up the business and it became one. That ran for years and years and years with great success and really, really helpful for me.
That kind of answers another question that I had, which is not one that I gave you in advance.
No, let's do it.
It's this, that you got this clear vision of how to ethically run this business and keep it ethical and so on. But what happens beyond you? What happens in the next generation? How do you keep this going? And I guess you partially answered that by talking about this accountability board, but it is about willingly staying accountable, isn't it?
It's willingly staying. And what's interesting is that accountability board has been dissolved because as the team has grown within EA, I now have a larger team that within ethical addictions will keep us accountable, and I've tried to pass on that DNA into.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating question of how far can it go?
Yeah.
And the honest answer is I don't know. How big can we get and maintain the DNA and the value that we have intrinsically in it now?
Yeah.
And can it get passed on to another generation beyond me? You see this all the time in different organizations, the passing on of the baton.
Yeah.
And whether you see it done well, you see it done not so well. And you see really, really good companies with good ethics lose sight of who they are because they were hugely successful.
Yeah.
And so the question of how big can we maintain it and maintain our values, it's something that's consciously in the back of the mind, kind of whirring around.
And I guess it's good that it is, and that's one of the things that's going to keep you on track. Now, I was talking to another CEO of another company. It makes me sound like I float in very high circles. I don't. But this particular CEO was saying that he always, they as an organisation always tried to be what he called deeply Christian rather than overtly Christian. So he was talking about Christian values rather than using a lot of Christian words in their day-to-day business affairs, and so that their faith guided all of their business decisions. And as a result, they didn't feel the need to be preaching the Christian faith to their customers. Their faith would speak for itself. So I'm just wondering, where do you stand on that, and how overt, how outspoken, how upfront do you think you should be about being a Christian in business?
Oh, such a broad question. I think that phrase of being deeply Christian but maybe not overtly Christian is probably how you interpret that is probably maybe different. But I'd probably agree with that statement. The problem is sometimes in our hunger to demonstrate our faith and to reach others, we inadvertently put up barriers that we don't want to put up. And so we can do that sometimes in our outreach programs. We can do that sometimes in our preaching.
Yeah.
We can do, and I think we can do that in our workplace, or in my case, in a business. If you are so overtly Christian before you've started a relationship with somebody, be it a customer or supplier, whatever that may be, you might not even get that opportunity to start building a relationship. They might immediately dismiss you before you've started.
Sure.
The other end of the spectrum is that you never mention it and no one would ever know, and that's probably wrong as well.
Yeah.
And so you've got to weave this, and I think this is very much how Jesus has taught us, isn't it? And you look at the Bible, and we're given. It's not a rule book for every scenario. You imagine the flow chart that would be. Like, if this happens, it's an impossible thing. But what God has done in his wisdom is given us a value system to work by, and we're supposed to then put that lens over every situation. And with the power of the Holy Spirit and the insight of and the wisdom of the Spirit, we should be able to discern where. So I'm definitely not going to be the one that dictates where on that spectrum, from never talk about Jesus to be in everyone's face about Jesus, where you should be, I should be, or any other business should be. But we're trying to find our place along that line. And so, for example, if you go to our website, you will find an interview with me, on a page that talks about supplying coffee to churches.
Right.
And it talks about how our faith impacts our business. You will find that we've posted journals and conversations, but you will not find it says Ethical Addictions, the Christian Coffee Company. That's not who we're trying to be.
As if there's something called Christian coffee.
As if there's something called a Christian business. They there isn't. We get people call us up going, "Are you a Christian business?" And I almost want to retort with like, What do you mean by that?
We are a business with Christian values.
Yes, and we are a business run by Christians who are trying to do that as honorably as they can as an act of worship. But nonetheless, I'm not sure that our business is saved. For what? Yeah.
Well, it's not. I guess it's not inoculated against the economy.
It definitely isn't.
But
it is a. So we are. The scripture that says we should always have an answer. We always have an answer, and there are time and time again where with a customer, like we are very, very different in the coffee world, and so people go, "Why do you do it this way?
Yes,
Why?"
Yes,
and then it becomes an opportunity to share as naturally and as openly and as honestly as is appropriate in the moment. This is why we do it. It's our faith that's driving us.
Yeah.
Because actually, if this was just about money, I wouldn't do it this way.
Speaking of money, one of the I'm not offering you. One of the difficult ethical areas is the subject of reasonable profit, which is also linked with reasonable wages.
Yes.
Is there a way of defining those two terms in the sense of honouring God, honouring people, and staying in business? I mean, how do you go about striking the balance?
Yeah. Again, there probably isn't a one rule fits all. Sure. There surely can't be. Mm-hmm. If we don't make profit, then we don't survive.
Sure.
Which means my staff lose their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
My farmers that we work with lose a good buyer, probably have to take a hit in income to sell it onto the normal market.
Yeah.
We're not around long term, and we can't. So you've got to make a profit. How do you make a reasonable profit? There's no absolute number to that, is there? You can't say, well, reasonable is only 15%, 20%, 40%. Sure. There is no number. But we know the coffee market is on one level very big, but particularly in the UK, it's very small. But, I know...
Not for want of my trying.
But there are coffees on the market that I know for a fact are making, I would argue, obscene profit margin.
Yeah.
Because you know what they've paid for their green unroasted bean. You know how much it costs them to roast it and put it into a bag. And then you see the price that they're selling it for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would argue that it is an unnecessary profit, that you are paying far more for the brand and for the perceived value than the actual value.
Sure.
So yeah, we try to walk a line of what is fair and good, and that is dictated to in some ways by the cost of product and production, and some ways by the market. I think the quality of our coffee, when you compare it to what else is out there, the market dictates we should charge more. But I'm hand on heart, I know that we're making enough profit to pay the staff.
Yeah.
To pay them well. We pay well within the industry. It's again a very small industry. I know lots of roasters. I know what the going rate is for staff in a roastery.
Yeah.
So we deliberately have always tried to pay above the going rate, not hugely, but nonetheless above the going rate, and to add value as well. So it's adding value, a reasonable wage. So much conversation in our whole society is always about wage or salary.
Yeah.
But actually, when you talk to individuals, job satisfaction, job purpose, feeling that they're part of a good team where they want to come to work, feeling that their whole package, as far as their salary, the benefits that go along on the fringe of that, the support and value they feel they have, they want to come to work. They're working for a company that has a purpose and they're making a difference. Yeah. All of that goes into the mix, I think, when you need to compare or contrast what wages are.
Yeah.
reasonable wages for me would always be. I think we're called to be generous, aren't we, as Christians? So I'd always want to be at least trying to be above the market rate, whatever that looks like.
And I guess treating the farmers in the countries that you mentioned earlier fairly and reasonably as well, because I guess that the normal business practice is squeeze those people as hard as possible.
Well, the normal business practice is to go down the line of supply. And keep squeezing. When there's pressures on price at our end in the Western world, particularly, we just want to. Where do you squeeze? And you're going to try and hurt the ones that have got less power and are easy to hurt. And so that's just market economics that doesn't have to be that way. It just doesn't have to be that way. So we pay the net price to us of our coffee when it lands in the UK is give or take the same price to me as it would be if I bought it from a trader already in the UK.
Okay.
So we're not paying a premium for the coffee landed in the UK. What we're doing is we're paying a premium to the farmer, cutting out several margins in the middle.
Yes.
And then what coffee changes hands anything from 7 to 15 times in the global market.
Wow.
So if you think every single one of those wants to take a margin, be it small or large, what we're doing is we're landing it in the UK at a price that is competitive in the sense that I can then be really, really competitive in our market. So our green bean price landed in the UK is similar to it would be from a trader. And what I've done is I've picked each of those margins off the different people that haven't handled it. And instead of me going, I'll have that. That's extra margin for me. We're pushing that back to the farm.
That's amazing. That is...
it's a simple model when I put it like that, but that is the principle of what we're doing.
It's a very good principle, yes. So there are probably people watching this podcast around the world who are Christians. They're looking to start a business either in the UK or some other place around the world. What advice would you give to them as they contemplate stepping out and launching a business? Perhaps along the lines of, what do you wish you'd been told when you were in that position yourself?
Yeah.
Other than it's too complicated, don't do it.
You've got to start with something that you feel passionate about. You know, if you're a Christian, then something you feel called to.
Yeah.
I think if you're gonna, it's not easy running a business, and so if you're gonna last, then you need to believe that you are in this and that you're called to do it. I think that's really, really important. I think the stats are, I think 80% of businesses fail within the first 2 years.
Oh, right.
And 80% of the remainder fail in the first 10. So, you know, if you want to last, you're going to be in the very, very small minority. And so what's going to make you stand out? I think even if it's something you know already, I think you need to do your research. Do your research into what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. If it's at all possible, get a mentor. Get a mentor. Get someone. Take advice from everyone. You can always dismiss it later, but just take advice from everyone you possibly can. Yes. We would say set principles from the start. We've already talked about that a little bit. If those principles aren't put in at the start, shoehorn them in later is really, really difficult.
Yes.
It's really, really difficult. Yeah. And so get those principles right from the start. Pray a lot. Mm-hmm. Dave and I prayed every Monday morning, Jesus, if this isn't you better shut it down. We did that for 2 years until we felt like Jesus say, enough. and
it's mine. Yeah.
And we do know it's his. I mean, the God stories that permeate ethical addictions even from its name through to the staff that have shown up, through to the relationships with farmers, through to just like God moments here, there, and everywhere. So we know it's his, and we can fall back on those trust of that. The other things I wrote down were to say, take calculated risks. Take calculated risks.
Yes.
Don't take stupid risks.
Yes.
Don't play it safe. Take calculated risks, invest in staff and invest in systems. I wish I'd invested more in systems earlier on, maybe better equipment and things like that, where we try to just penny pinch to fear of spending money, losing money, whatever that might be. I think we should have invested maybe earlier.
Right.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
But investing in staff and spending time there.
Yeah.
And then I said, do not work and sacrifice your family or your faith. I think if you build a business that in 10 years' time, you turn around and you're profitable and you're doing even great stuff with purpose, but you turn around and your marriage is in pieces.
Yes.
Or you're no longer part of a church community.
Yeah.
And you're no longer walking with Jesus, then you've got to ask, what was the point?
Yeah.
What was the point? Yeah. So it can't be at that cost. And have fun. I genuinely enjoy what we do. I have stressful weeks. I have stuff that goes wrong. I have weeks where I'm maybe not having so much fun. But on the whole, I love what we do. Yeah. I value so much the team that I get to work with. Yeah. And we have a lot of fun. Yeah. We get work done, but we have a lot of fun, and that's important too.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Ian, that's been illuminating. Thank you so much. And if people had specific questions to ask you, would it be okay if they contact us? Our email address being info@kingfisher.org.uk. And would it be okay if we pass those questions on to you?
Absolutely, of course. Yes.
That'd be great. I take what you say about having mentors. The things that I picked up about doing church over the years, I didn't know any of it when I was at Bible college, and I wasn't taught the right things there. So having learned experience is so important.
Crucial.
Learning by your mistakes is really important, but learning by other people's mistakes is far less painful. So,
yes.
So it's been really good to hear some of your story. Thank you. You said you had a website.
Yes.
Do you know what the address is?
I do, yeah. So you can take a look at what we do on eacoffee.co.uk.
Gosh, that's one of the easier to remember ones, eacoffee.co.uk.
Yes, it is.
Wonderful. Ian, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.